So let's start with a look not at the games.
Hmm.
Let's start with a look at some science fiction television.
Sure.
And in particular, now this is sort of not thinking about it in terms of role playing. Let's not think about role playing for a minute, and just think about watching science fiction shows on TV. What I was interested in is what kinds of trends or groups seem to make sense
Mm.
to you when we think about science fiction television? What are the types of shows from the point of view of a television executive, I guess?
I mean, I don't know from the point of view of a television executive. I know kind of the cultural
Hmm.
background is a good way to see them. When you look at Star Trek, they like they reflect a lot on the kind of on the era, on the politics of the era, and all of that. But from a commercial point of view,
Uh,
I'm not sure.
well, do the cultural one. That's fine. I mean, I guess I was saying the executive because that person is trying to reach the culture to make money off it.
Hmm.
So,
Well,
but close
oh
enough,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. um, well, I guess for example with Doctor Who, with the early ones, Doctor Who, Star Trek, especially Star Trek, um, there were Star Trek at least was a reaction to in many ways it was trying to it was a reaction to the Cold War
Hmm.
and trying to breach beyond like that nationalism of and trying to include different cultures and trying to recapture uh, I guess an idea of the idea of exploring and discovering new cultures and also this idea of a society which is communism but approved by the USA government.
Well,
Uh,
it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think of it.
kind
I think of the Star Trek the Star Trek notion or ideology almost. Oops, did I lose you? No. Okay.
oh, yeah,
I think of it
mhm.
sometimes as yes, we are the Earth as a whole, the American way. You know,
Yes,
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just make sure that the right people have kind of led the way, and then that'll be fine. But but also the first Star Trek was so various, so different in all of its little pieces because
Mm,
it wasn't really a setting. They just kind of kept trying things.
yeah.
And so, but then so I tend to think of Star Trek in the 1960s and a bit of the fandom of 1970s, and then after
Okay.
that, it's kind of the franchise, and that's okay. It's just
Mm,
I just think of it as different things, and I
okay.
don't get upset about it anymore. And then, but what were you? So you're talking about it as an expression of the times.
Yeah, I think science fiction tends to talk a lot about the now.
Mhm.
Like,
I completely agree about that. What's interesting about TV for that
mhm,
purpose is that television traditionally, I don't know about right now with all the new technology and cable shows and things, but traditionally, television has had to be kind of safe. It's had to be
yeah,
to play it kind of safe to. And one of the interesting things about science fiction television is that it was thought of as junk.
mm,
So you could get away more in the science fiction shows than you could in some other shows. You could say more radical things. You could present more radical views. I'm thinking of the Star Trek episode from the third season of the original series. Let that be your last battlefield.
mm,
And that's the one with the alien who is black on the white side on one side and white on the other, and these enemies with the other alien who's exactly the opposite, and they are the last two members of these two ethnic groups who hate each other,
mm,
and they are ideologically completely opposed, and they consider each other to be irreconcilably different from each other. And it's a very preachy episode in lots of ways, but on the other hand, it's pretty well written. And
Yeah.
and it's also, but imagine maybe somebody will show me a drama episode from the same era and I'll be completely wrong. But I suspect that the outcome of the episode probably wouldn't have been shown in a more naturalistic environment. In the outcome, they almost destroy the Enterprise until they're forced off of it.
Mm.
And they kill each other in the ruins of their planet. They go back to their home planet and they kill each other. And that's it. There
Yeah, it's a
isn't
very dark ending.
Yeah, there isn't a reconciliation. In fact, I think that's one of the differences. I don't want to go into this zone because I'm intolerable when I go there. But that's one big difference between Star Trek the original series and the franchise.
Mm.
The idealism of the Star Trek concept, it's pretty hard to find in the first series.
Mm.
And so it's not totally absent, but it's not as developed and as centralizing and as vivid as it is in the later parts. But the
Mhm.
and again, it's we have so many shows and so many characters and so many writers. I don't want to generalize too much, but I'm just saying that could you take a show in 1968 that was set in a completely naturalistic environment and have a racial ethnic hatred drama that ended like that?
Yeah,
You
yeah, I
know,
get what you mean.
yeah, and it seems a little. I could be wrong, but I don't think TV went that far very often in its depiction of ordinary people. I think you have to go to science fiction,
Mm.
maybe. So, so do you see that that plays out in later shows? The same concepts, the same ideas, the same or the same principle.
I've seen the kind of being able to tell stories that most other shows are not able to.
Well, that was my version of it. I was thinking more of your version that they are just very expressive of their particular era.
So I'm thinking of weird samples because from that era, you're saying that you miss many of these shows. I wasn't there
Hmm.
to even miss them, so I haven't catch up with many of them yet. But I'm thinking of 80s anime and 80s science fiction anime. And it's interesting because at that era there was it was kind of the golden era for the mecha shows, the
Right,
giant
right.
robots.
Oh yeah. Hmm. I remember
uh
when I was in college when those became popular, and I remember looking at it and thinking, "What am I looking at? What are those?" But go on.
Yeah, I think they were a pretty good reflection of Japan the era, like the obsession with advanced technology, but also they were some of them were able to get very political, and although there was a lot of battles and all that, it was also a lot about the politics, and there was no one who was like always on the right side
Right.
and that kind of stuff. One of my favorites, the one I was thinking about to bring, Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
Yeah, it is this massive series that I don't know for a lot of years, and it is like basically high level battles with like thousands of spaceships, military maneuvers, and all that. And again, it's a very interesting show because they are showing you like a totalitarian empire uh, with a very nationalist kind of feeling, and like a kind of democratic republic, but also kind of corrupt.
Right.
And you are following both sides, and you have protagonists on both sides, and there's no like a clear these are the good guys. And for Japan at the time, that I think that's pretty interesting.
And so there's this very uneasy relationship between the cultures. There's this huge love for Japan and in American pop culture, but during that very same time in the 80s, there was a lot of fear.
Mm.
A lot the Japanese were considered these semi-alien bad guys who were somehow better at business and technology than us, and we better look out. And and it's a very complicated thing.
Yeah.
I always wondered about. I mean, anime was weird too because p- partly the cultural standards for what you could show in animation
Yeah.
were different, and that made the cartoons more radical to us than they were to the Japanese visually.
Yes.
I mean, it was really adopted. I mean, fandom in the United States just grabbed anime,
Yeah.
manga too, of course, but especially. I mean, it got straight onto the television. I mean, they
Yeah.
went
I
straight
know.
into network TV, and kids grew up on it. They didn't just.
Yeah.
It wasn't just fans. Kids just generally just
I know.
started growing up on it. Yeah,
Same thing happened in Spain,
yeah.
but 10 years later.
Oh, is that so?
So I
Okay.
catch that
Ah,
revolution.
I see. Yeah, but let's take a look at the content. We're talking about really
Mhm.
large scale war.
Yeah.
Either it's in kind of the solar system or global, or they just jump it up and it's the galaxy or a great
Yeah.
deal of the galaxy. Either way. And but it's a very much a war show. You have a lot of militarism in science fiction television. And I mean a lot. The characters, I think many disproportionately the shows take place either among military personnel or people who are very very close to it,
Mhm.
um, or if you want to broaden it a little bit, some kind of special government agency with a very action, very mission oriented approach.
Mhm.
um, i'm thinking of uh, I'm thinking of the Stargate TV series, the first one,
Yeah.
where the characters aren't. I mean, they have military rank, but they don't serve in ordinary forces in wartime. But the whole thing really is a military context. You
Mhm.
know, they are part of that structure. That structure is given an important role in the show. So anyway, that to me is kind of a family of science fiction television, is
Mhm.
being in the military or living in a military fashion with its command structure and its some aspect of its value system and things like that. You're just part of it.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. Another one, and this is kind of my favorite, is sort of the reverse.
Mhm.
And it is the small rogue spaceship that's probably has a dysfunctional crew, like I was posting about in the game that I played recently, and is having adventures and is in a lot of trouble. They
Mhm.
don't really they're not they may be completely fugitives, or they're just outside the law enough so that they have to be super careful.
Mhm.
And there's probably an older one or two, but the first one that I really know about is Blake 7 from the 1970s.
Mhm. I don't know about that one.
Well, you'll know it from its offspring. Um, a group of escaped convicts from a prison ship have managed to locate a small, unknown alien spaceship,
Mhm.
which they have taken over and broken free of their prison ship. And now they are fugitives. And one of them was a political revolutionary, a guy who was going to overthrow the government, which is terrible, by the way. It's like the worst of the worst. The worst empire, the worst everything. Makes the guys in Star Wars look kind of reasonable. I mean, they're really bad. So so that's them. And the main characters, the captor, the leader of this small band is the political revolutionary who's idealistic but very very ruthless. And he says, "Great, I've got this spaceship. All right, that does it. You know, we are back at it." Of course, he has this crew of completely career criminals who are cynical or psychopathic or mercenary and don't really have much interest in putting themselves in danger, you know,
Mhm.
in this political sense. And so he has to kind of watch his back all the time because a couple of them are always really kind of thinking about maybe he's our problem, you know. And so and so it's a great show. It's crazy. It's British. It has no budget whatsoever. You have to kind of get used to
Mm.
the tinfoil and stuff like that. But it set the pace for all of those shows afterward. Um, you watch. I mean, there's a bunch, but if you take a look at the more recent ones, you've got Cowboy Bebop and Farscape and Lex and Firefly,
Yeah.
and all of them are deeply influenced by Blake Seven. You
Yeah, I
once you
can see
watch them,
there's a couple new ones,
right,
more or less new ones that are also in that vein, like Dark Matter
right.
and Killjoys, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm sure there are some that I don't know about or miss or
yeah,
forgot to say. Star Trek is kind of an interesting one, of a group, a substantially large ship with lots of, I mean, you don't know the whole crew, and they also are really going out there. And so with that very broad understanding, that's where you get your original Battlestar Galactica, your original and then your later
mm,
Battlestar 2. I mean, just the idea of these ships out there. Then we have shows that are different in that they're set on, they're not out there in space, but they are here, whether it's future or our Earth or sort of a distorted version or whatever. But
hmm,
there's usually some kind of social problem or technology which is very intense. One version of that, which is not very common, was Alien Nation, in which it was about immigration. It was based on a movie, but it moved away from the movie pretty quickly. Most of them ones that are based on the movies, after you watch them for a little while, they kind of forget about the movie. This kind of thing usually highlights social problems in a very direct way.
mm,
Um, and usually you have a persecuted minority, or you have a very, very deadly danger that some of the people need to stop, somehow. Some of the heroes basically need to help stop. Um,
mm.
and so it's so I guess I'm saying that these shows are, they may be set here and now, or they may be set in a different future, or maybe the planet is a little differently, but it's really a very local story.
Yeah,
And
I'm thinking of a recent Portuguese show that it has been like broadcasted outside by Netflix called I think 3%.
I've seen
It's
it.
basically
Yeah.
oh
Yeah, I've seen, not the whole thing. I've seen
yeah, I
about
mean
5 or 6 episodes. It's so horribly depressing that I'm watching it, and then I'm like, I watch an episode, I'm like, okay, I'm done for the month. I'll come back to this next month.
I mean it is a
Yeah,
dystopian show like
yeah. Oh, it really is. I mean, it's horrifying. I mean, but but yeah, that's. I mean, the dystopian ones are kind of like special examples of that, right? You're taking and there aren't that many TV shows like that.
yeah, no,
Movies,
there's
yes, but not TV.
yes.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things. There's one thing that I never see on TV until maybe, well, no, I take it back. Not even that. Um, which is the idea, which is very common in science fiction, which is that there's this future. It's a lot like what you described for Stars Without Number. All
Hmm.
these far-flung human societies that have lost contact with each other for all so long, and many of them have become very strange little places. But a lot of them, I don't know about Stars Without Number, but a lot of them in this kind of thinking have a very medieval society.
Hmm.
And so they might have strange animals, or they might have energy weapons or something, but they live in a fashion that's more reminiscent of the 14th or 15th century than.
Hmm.
So you've seen probably lots of examples of this, but mostly in the books. Not they don't do that in television. Um,
Oh yeah. I'm thinking. What is this? The new this book collection of the new sun.
yeah, the Book of the New
Uh,
Sun by Gene Wolfe.
the book of
Yeah,
yes, that one.
yeah,
It
that's a
is like
particularly intense version of that. Yeah,
yeah. You, it's really hard to tell that it's supposed to be science fiction.
right, right. Well, yes, until you get used to it and suddenly realize how many robots and stuff are actually running around.
Yeah.
But it takes a little while, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The So yes, that's an extreme example, and there are some others that are also pretty intense. But my point is that that's a very well worked concept in written science fiction,
Mm.
but it didn't translate onto TV, partly for budget, maybe. I don't know. Maybe, well, TV is also kind of conservative in the creative sense. They look at what has worked in the past and then they say, okay, we're going to do that. They tend
Mm.
not to try a new thing unless somebody weird gets in and has some power for a while. And so you don't really completely get. I mean, what I'm saying is that science fiction television doesn't really represent written science fiction proportionately.
Yeah, it's usually
Instead,
said that
right,
first things like are explored in written science fiction, and like 10 years later, maybe they
right,
get to TV and
right,
movies.
right. But even so, the television, in my opinion,
Hmm.
something will hit, and then a whole bunch of things like it are made,
Hmm.
either right away or just down the path of time. And so you have less conceptual chunks of television science fiction than you do of science fiction in general. Um, so you have kind of your group of small. Here's another one: a small band of people who jump to different places or times to deal with some kind of problem. Stargate does that too.
Hmm.
But there's lots. I mean, you go to any of the time travel ones, like Sliders, right?
Hmm.
Jumping to the different dimensions and stuff like that. This group is a small core, and then this week we see where they jump, you know.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of been done for different justifications, slightly different plot reasons each time, but the basic idea is the same.
Hmm. And
Um,
Doctor Who is basically the
right.
precursor of that, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. We have really, really interesting versions of fewer things.
Hmm.
Another thing I want to ask about, and maybe this is something I'd like to open up to lots of people, not just you and me, but what what's the relationship among watching a show because you like it, being a fan, and watching this show as part of your fan identity in general,
Hmm.
not just a fan of the show, but being a science fiction fan.
Yeah,
And then you'll buy things about the show. You'll get the book that like has all the characters and all of their little biographies.
yeah,
It's a
it
it's a
becomes
it's
part
a
of your
commercial
identity.
commitment that's bigger than just watching the show.
Hmm.
You know,
I mean, I don't know if uh, I don't think this will be something necessarily particular to science fiction.
that's
Uh,
true. That's true.
uh, we could talk about the how uh, how identity is cultivated to basically sell you the idea of, oh, you are part of this community,
Right.
this is part of your identity,
Especially if you buy this thing.
especially if you buy
Right.
this thing.
Um,
And also the idea
however,
that
however, really does let's pick a show that's not science fiction.
Mhm.
Let's pick a popular. I mean, like a really popular show.
uh,
Um,
Game of Thrones.
sure. Well, Game of Thrones is still in kind of the geek fantasy world.
Okay,
I was
so
thinking
outside of
something
that,
really mainstream.
Breaking Bad.
Sure. Do people do people tell me if I'm wrong? I mean, now that I think about it, you can buy Walter White figures and put them in your car, right? You can,
Yes,
I don't
the
know if I've ever
teaser.
seen I don't know if I've ever seen anyone walking around with a Breaking Bad t-shirt.
I have,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah, maybe so. I'm thinking about, I don't know. I mean, maybe it is like that. I was thinking back to old shows when I was young.
I
And did
mean,
did anybody ever walk around with a Cheers T-shirt? Maybe they did.
mm,
I don't know.
that is true. I, I guess, yeah, I think culture as a whole has become better at cultivating fandom in
Right,
people.
right,
So, and before, I think it was science fiction fantasy was
A little bit more oriented toward that, maybe somehow. Yeah, I don't know.
or well, it provided more opportunities for it
Yeah,
because it was like a this whole universe
right. A
you
captive
could get
market in
into.
some ways. Yeah. If you sell this
Yeah,
thing here, you can also sell this other thing, even though they have nothing to do with each other. But if a person liked this show, then they were going to be reading this comic or something like that. Maybe.
yeah, and before like you could not like what cheers like the show like what are you like how much merchandise and
Right.
conventions can you do out
Exactly.
of it?
Right.
With the Star Trek, you have like this whole universe with
Right.
backstory, thousands of years
There's
of.
also the concept of the kid market, because
Mm,
even though Star Trek by no stretch of the imagination was a kid's show, it wasn't a kid's show. But its marketing to children in the 70s was very, very strong. And so I'm thinking about all the toys, all the
mm,
models, all that sort of thing. The in fact, the more that I think about it, the more fandom at that time had to do with buying toys and models than anything
mm.
else, right? They didn't, they didn't have much other. There was some secondary merchandise. By today's standards, not very much, and at the time, it was considered kind of excessive. It
Mhm.
was, kind of, if you were a person who bought one of those phasers, those model phasers, you were you were pretty intense. I mean, that was considered, people were, I mean, it was not mainstream to buy a book in Klingon, right? That was not done, you know. But anyway, perhaps this is just ancient history bullshit. So what I guess I'm saying is that there does seem to be an interesting relationship, though, between enjoying the show as something you do, just a way to spend your leisure time,
Yeah.
and your identity as a cultural presence, your self identity as it relates to other people.
Yes,
Um,
and even now, like yeah, there's merchandise for Breaking Bad, but there's no one is going around calling themselves like Breaking Badders or whatever.
right, right, yeah, that's true.
There's not that
Yeah,
level.
yeah. Sometimes
Uh,
there is, but not that often. Not as often as in science fiction, I think. With that in mind, now we say, okay, well, this television presence is enormous. This is the kind of presence in culture that role playing just dreams of, just people like when role playing becomes popular, what they mean is when role playing becomes like television. They, that they,
mm,
so what do we see in science fiction role playing games? Role playing is not just like an extension of the television, just like, I mean, it's kind of like it's coming from science fiction and fantasy, just like TV is, but they're not. They don't have the same profile.
mhm.
For one thing, role playing doesn't do that little rogue spaceship thing very well. Every time it tries, it turns into something else. Like Traveler began, the big selling point of the original Traveler is the transmission on the cover. Are you familiar with it? This is
Yes,
this
yeah,
is Free
yeah,
Trader Beowulf, right? Every
yeah,
gamer knows that line. Free Trader
yeah.
Beowulf, calling, dot 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 dot. This is Free Trader Beowulf. Well, so you have this image of this one guy out there in his tough little ship in desperate circumstances, right?
Mhm.
Trying to make it. Well, then you get Mega Traveler and you have this huge setting, right? And so what happened to your little guy?
Yeah.
And I know that Traveler has been in and out and back and forth and owned by this and designed by that and back to Mark Miller, all up and down. So you can see people maybe struggling with that, I guess. And I'm not saying people don't play it, but and there are plenty of games that are claiming to be based on those shows, like the Firefly games and the Farscape games and all
Mhm.
these things, and yet, and I'm not an expert in those games, but I'm kind of interested in how many of them manage to preserve the desperation of the single ship
Mhm.
as opposed to just getting all excited about this broad setting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to speak for the games that I don't know very well. But I do know that when I think of science fiction role playing, I tend to think of really broad settings with lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff in them,
Hmm.
and not as much about a very localized ship. And I know people are designing toward that too. I mean,
Yeah,
I know I've seen people like lots of indie game drafts and stuff like that.
yeah. There's a
Yeah,
few.
there's a few kicking around, and Shu Skogan has one, and there are a few others. But it's again for some reason for something that seems so strong in television seems a little harder to find or harder to pin down in role playing.
And
Um,
it's weird because at the end, like it will look pretty simple. Like you have your small party going on adventures.
it does seem pretty straightforward. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And again, I bet a lot of people have done it at the table.
Hmm.
I bet in practice you see it. Um,
I
but it
mean,
is
maybe because it is less commercially interesting. Because yeah, you have your ship going around. You cannot have the supplement of the last 5,000 years of history. Here's
that
everything you
does
need
seem
to
to be
do.
science fiction settings and role playing do tends to want to be encyclopedic.
Hmm.
And the other thing I was thinking too is that those shows are based on surprise.
Hmm.
They're based on who knows what is going to happen next. Um,
And also they are not. Yeah, they are like you said about the Star Trek. They were based around very specific ideas, like oh, what would happen if we had this kind of society
right.
on this planet? We'll see
Mhm.
how it goes. Coming up with that every session.
Well, and
My,
commercially speaking, as a role playing publisher, particularly in the 80s and 90s, what were you going to sell?
hmm,
I mean, if the surprise is happening at the table, well, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I was thinking too that in most of these settings, now the original Star Trek's not a good example.
hmm,
It sort of went that way by accident almost, but I'm talking about the concept of drama, ongoing drama among persons, individuals. The kind of thing you see in
hmm,
most in prime, the kind of thing Primetime Adventures is built to do.
yeah,
That these characters are going to run into one another. These characters are going to have different opinions. These characters are going to get along and not get along. And
yeah,
that this itself is really the drama to follow.
yeah. The
Um,
space soap opera.
right. And so, and in many cases, I mean, really, in the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, who really cared about like the secret of the Cylons and their plan?
Yeah,
No, we cared about who was screwing who and who was,
yeah,
getting
yeah.
in trouble about this or that, who was lying about something, and how this showed that this person still had some humanity in them. And
Hmm.
no, this showed that that person, no, that's gone. You know,
Hmm.
and so I'm not making fun of anything. This is the essence. This is a very, very. If you look at a lot of genres, oh sorry, if you look at a lot of what I was calling idioms, like whether it's a western or a this or a that or
Yeah.
this or that, they have this.
Hmm.
And so if we think about that in role playing and leave primetime adventures out of it, if we think about that in role playing and we look at the, like for example, I'm going to take here's the one example I brought, and
Hmm.
this is Cyworld. This is
Okay.
a game from quite some time ago. It is from Fantasy Games Unlimited, FGU.
Hmm.
The same group that originally put out Villains and Vigilantes, and it's got art by for all the artists listening. The artists are interesting names to point out: Jeff D. and Matt Wagner, often working on the same piece together, which is you know kind of surprising. And I can name a couple of others: Rich Rankin, Bill Willingham. All of them are, in fact, that's a Willingham cover. Yeah, Willingham inks by Matt Wagner. These to comics people.
Okay.
These names are like, you've got to be kidding. All of them in this one box. It's like, yes, back when they were gamers. And so, but it's very straightforward. You have a near future, and people have psionic powers. They're
Mhm.
appearing, and they are pretty straightforward genre, psionic powers, no real big surprises or twists.
Mhm.
Different people have different kinds, I'm a this, you're a that, they have them in different degrees, stuff like that. And you can play one of two ways. The game says you can do it either way. You can either play the human psychor, who is worried about what are effectively superpowered terrorists and,
Mhm.
threats, and hunting them down, or you
Mhm.
can play the psionics, who are struggling to find their way in the world.
Mm.
And I can only hope that most people chose to do the latter instead of the former, but maybe I'm just idealistic. um, but
Mm.
the uh, but the issue though is pretty straightforward. The game is really brutal in terms of mechanics. If you get shot, you die. um, it's uh, for those of you who are familiar with Fantasy Games Unlimited, it's a lot more streamlined than the stereotype. Somebody put a lot of thought into making it playable, a lot like Villains and Vigilantes, which looks like a mess but is surprisingly playable. It's kind of similar, but it's got crazy equations, and really really derived numbers and things like that. But it's really pretty clean conceptually. Yeah, here you go. I'm gonna say I want to play a psionic. Okay, roll, find out what powers you've got, find out, it's fine. There's no real bad answer. You might want to be able to shoot people with your mind, but you might not roll it. You might lift things. It's okay. And so just get used to it. And then, however, you're going to be in a lot of danger. Either way, this game is tons of danger. You're
Mhm.
playing a hunter or you're playing a hunted. Well, those roles can flip either way, very
Mhm.
quickly. And so it's it looks boring, but it's kind of compelling,
Mhm.
except that it has nothing to do with any relationships among any characters. And there are games from that era that are very heavy mechanics and very, you would think of them as being pretty meat and potatoes, how does auto
Yeah.
fire work? But if you read them and you think about playing in the setting, you can't help it. It's going to be about relationships too.
Mm.
A lot of the superhero games are like that. The superhero games become about relationships real fast. And not just because people are emulating the comics. I mean, it's kind of implicit in so much else about it. And the same goes for a lot of the fantasy games, surprisingly, I think. You can,
Mm.
I mean, especially, and of course, it's all about RuneQuest for me. But RuneQuest has a way of creating relationships among characters that can be very strong in play. So this one, you're looking at it and saying, "Wow, I wonder if that would happen in this game." There's certainly nothing in it, and no text that even looks
Hinted.
that way. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
no look at it. None of the examples, none of the situations. They tend to be very tactical situations.
Mm.
And so I'm not saying that you wouldn't do that in play, but it's not, you can't read the game and say this is about episodic and developing and
Mm.
crashing and blossoming relationships, right? You don't really even need really explicit mechanics for it, but it's not really even, doesn't seem to be on anyone's mind, you know. And so there's something very untelevision about that.
Yes, like something was lost in translation, maybe.
Well, what I'm saying is that you're going to the game from science fiction and you're going to television from science fiction, but they don't cross, you
Mm.
know. And so it's a good example of how the two things can be really different. So I'm interested in when they're not different. Where do we
Mhm.
find games that seem to draw on science fiction TV specifically And the obvious place to look are the licensed ones. But the question is whether those really count or whether it's just a license.
Well, that's the thing. That's why we needed other people, because I don't really know
Yeah,
much about
yeah, that's it.
licensed games.
Me neither. I know. I just don't pick them up. So, or very
Uh,
few.
The one I was thinking of bringing is Lady Blackbird,
Right, right. Uh
which
huh.
is, yeah, I think it's inspired by that kind of fiction, partially. And I don't think it plays much more on the relationship among cultures, but that's very recent.
Right.
Well,
I call it.
kind of.
I call it recent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly. But yeah. I mean, that's. So, what do we see from it? You say it's got the values clash, the cultural tension, or
I mean, it's more of the kind where you have a group of cultures with different interests put it under a stressful situation, and they have to like get out of it, and they bond over it, like
right.
kind of like Han Solo and Leia on the original Star Wars. Uh,
I'm
that's
thinking,
kind of,
yeah, I'm thinking
Mhm.
as well in a longer sense. One of the most important science fiction TV shows was Babylon 5,
Mhm.
which became very influential on, well, pretty much on all the shows after that.
Mhm.
And it was a sister show with Deep Space Nine. So I'm not going to say one or the other. We can even just think of them as almost just twins, right? Born together. And and in that one, you have, instead of this galaxy of, well, you do have a galaxy, but you don't really go out in the galaxy. Very,
Mhm.
very little time in the show is spent off on some planet. Most of it, the vast majority, takes place on the station. And the
Mhm.
station is a big melting pot. It's where the League of Planets meets, for example.
Yeah.
And it's this melting pot of cultures just by travelers, but it's also a battleground of politics where all the ambassadors are face to face.
Mhm.
And so it's but again, it develops the relationships and the outlooks of the characters as the most powerful. It's one of the very few shows that actually manages to develop that at the same time as it develops the external story of the various diplomatic and
Mhm.
deceptions and aggressions and the war. Um, it's And so if we're thinking about role playing games that do that, something like that, yeah, exactly. There's so many science fiction games, and yet somehow they seem a little light on that. Even the Babylon Project. You see, this is a licensed game I do know a lot about. I played the
Mhm.
hell out of the Babylon Project. And for those of you who know, for the people who know, uh, you know, Babylon 5 in the 90s, this was during season 4. Right when we were watching that is when we're playing, the Babylon Project, and we were really into it. Well, the problem that we ran into, and I'm given to understand that this has occurred with more than one game, is that the owners of the license didn't want the game to have anything in it that hadn't been shown yet,
Mhm.
and it didn't want it to contradict anything that was going to happen.
Huh.
And so the licensed material for the game was only from seasons 1 and part of season 2, I think, maybe
Mhm.
season 2. And so that really didn't have in it any of the external tensions or the secrets and in particular was very light on something on the primary enemy of the show. The primary
Mhm.
bad guy of the show was not in it. And so by the time you were a fan of the show, why would you want to play this game? Nothing that you liked is in it,
Mhm.
and so it's a little tricky. We found ourselves having to be clever. Of course we could inject into it anything we wanted, but we were also very interested in examining the game and seeing what it had to offer. And we found again that it was easy to play the part of one of the aliens like you saw them on the show. It
Hmm.
wasn't very easy for this character to have relationships that developed and and became interesting. I mean, you could do it just by the way you played the character, but there wasn't anything to grab onto when you had very elaborate rules. In fact, these were pretty good rules for what happens if you miss your gunshot.
Hmm.
And as far as those rules were concerned, actually, Babylon Project had some really, really good. It had a really clever way of actually dealing with the effects of shots being fired by everybody, every which way, and it's I missed was not the end of the story for that projectile. But the point is that that's not where the if that's where the energy was play was going,
Hmm.
that's where the system of play was going. It wasn't going anywhere that really resembled why we were watching the show. There was
Hmm.
no way to get involved in the politics, and the politics is most of the show.
Hmm.
There's really no way to, you couldn't be in or near the bridge because those are the protagonists, or involved with their problems very easily. They sort of recommended go be off, below decks, go somewhere else, play somewhere else. The station is big. There's lots of places to play. And you're kind of
Hmm.
like, yeah, but I want to, I like the show because of these people,
Yeah.
So you see, there's sort of a contradiction. If you like a show because of the protagonists, which most of us do, then you get the role playing game, which almost by definition, especially from the point of view of the licensor, doesn't want you anywhere near those protagonists.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of a, I don't know about, I mean, how many Star Trek games are there? There's at least five.
I have no
Yeah,
idea.
there's at least five, and I don't know how many, if any, focused on personal moral crisis, which is what almost every single episode of Star Trek is about.
Huh. Trying to think of the most recent one released by Modifius.
Right.
I've only played uh like 15 minutes of playtest in one of the conventions. So
No, that's hard to say at
yeah,
that
I
point.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see much of that, but again, like
Right. But it does
no.
seem to be kind of an interesting disconnect. There's another thing which is you see in role playing that you don't see in TV, a lot
Mm,
of it, which is survivalist militarism. The Holocaust has come, the apocalypse has come. We are a band of military survivors. So not like Apocalypse World or Road Warrior,
mhm.
but our hatch opened and we came up, and we've got all the bullets we need, and we're gonna fight our way to freedom back to the United States because we're in some well, what was it that the current president called them? Those other countries? Right,
Yeah,
yes. And so,
yeah.
but so that, you're somewhere like that, or some part of the United States has been rendered like that. So now you're trying to make your way to Washington, or you're trying to set up a community to, survive. I'm thinking of things like, Twilight 2000, but that's just one of many.
Mm,
Um, the anime games, though, because there it starts with, I think, with Mechton from Mike Pondsmith, the guy who did Cyberpunk,
mm,
and he's the one who started doing anime giant robot games.
mm.
Um, and I don't know how relationshipy they are. Do you know?
Uh, Not really. And with anime games, I'm only familiar with a few.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, I have no idea. I imagine most of the. Yeah, I don't even want to say because I have
Yeah.
no idea.
The
Like,
one I know best is Heavy Gear, and
mm,
if I get so confused about what is or isn't licensed and franchised and what isn't. I don't know. I was
mm,
sort of under the impression that Heavy Gear was a role playing property that was just heavily influenced by other IPs, but I could be wrong. But
mm.
maybe, for all I know, there's a whole TV series and series of comic books. for all I know. But I played Heavy Gear, and that one, it tried. There was
Hmm.
talk of play your characters outside of the robot suits,
Yeah,
but it was mostly about the combat. It was mostly about how you fought when you were out of your robot and how you fought when you were in your robot. Because the conceit of the game was that you would switch to the wargaming rules when you were in your robot, and
hmm.
then you would play the wargaming stuff.
I mean,
That's
with
the idea.
anime inspired mecha games, like I would imagine they will have at least try.
Right, right.
If they were taken from anime,
They have
like
to. What else do they watch
yeah,
for God's sake? You
yeah,
know? Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that's what I'm
uh,
thinking too. I mean, I can't
and
imagine.
that's what.
How are you going to say no, May? Right? I mean, if I'm playing in a robot game, a big robot game, that's what I'm going to be saying. Right? I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean that's where what Blizzard Stage tried to do. Not
uh
really
huh.
like
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I'm trying to be like generous. I'm not saying they missed the boat or did it wrong. I'm pretty sure that there's something like that, but I haven't really encountered it.
Hmm.
You know. Now this, on the other hand, Albedo. Are you familiar with Albedo? This is a historic
Ah,
game.
have no idea.
Okay, well it's Australian. Paul Kidd wrote it, and he's the guy who did Lace and Steel as well.
Hmm.
And some really interesting games coming out of Australia. And it's based on an '80s comic, small press comic that
Hmm.
was that's anamorphic. The characters are walking around, dogs and cats and stuff, and they and it's in a military situation. I won't go into it. Basically, there's a bunch of star systems. There's a political history. There's a certain justification without getting into it too much about why they're all animals, um, which is mostly played for the usual reason that it's an easy route to characterization and it's kind of fun. I mean, you don't have to be all techie about it. The guy had a military background and he could seriously draw some ships.
Hmm.
He was really really good at all the equipment and ships, and he real casual about it too. It's really an easy read, and it's a nice little drama. It's a cool story. It deals with sexism in the military. It deals with you know it's a bit idealistic. The good guys are like the warrior, poet, scholar, intellectuals with a good values and stuff like that. And so it's a little simplistic, but it's a good story. The characters are interesting. His
Hmm.
dramatic sense is good. The dialogue is good. It was a liked comic,
Hmm.
and it was one of the first ones to really just have these anamorphic characters that are not being played for comedy, but are being used for their animalness as characterization. I don't know if you know the porn comic Omaha the Cat Dancer, that came out a little after that, and in some ways there's you can kind of see how Omaha draws on principles of Albedo, because Omaha the Cat Dancer is famous for being a pretty decent soap opera as well as a lot of porn, and so it's it's kind of a that there's a few others.
Hmm.
Usagi Yojimbo actually started in the same comic that Albedo did.
Hmm.
And so a lot of people think of those and a few others as kind of the first family of, you can almost think of them as pre-furry animorphs. I mean, I don't want to, that kind of, somebody will correct me, I'm sure, but that kind of fandom comes a little bit later,
Hmm.
somewhat to the surprise of the people who did the comics. They're kind of
Hmm.
like, wait, what? And so but also Albedo had fairly explicit relationships and reasonably adult, not really pornographic, but adult sex scenes and relationships about that and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
the game, which admittedly is, I mean, there is a megaton of tissue trauma in the rules, right? Of the
Oh,
different ways you can take damage, right?
yeah,
And the different ways that different kinds of armor will deal with the incoming damage. I mean, there is There is a lot of that in there.
Mm.
But it has, as far as I know, role playing's first quantified relationship mechanics.
Huh.
And they're complicated. You have your core personality and your inclination personality, which prefigures vampire, right? So this is well before vampire. And the people who did vampire were very experienced, very literate role players. I'm pretty sure they knew about albedo. And so you have core and inclination personality. You also have drive and stability, and those can vary independently. Or rather, they are independent scores. You can have high one, low the other, or whatever, and those relate to your core and your inclination. And then you also have self-image.
Mm.
So that's how you look at yourself. This is how you are, but how do you look at yourself? And that score goes up and down all the time, and it's the governor and the target for lots of other scores.
Oh, that's
So if you're
interesting.
trying to mess with somebody, you attack their self-image when it's low, right? You wait until it's low and then you go after it. And it's going up and down based on the things that are going on relative to the GM is looking at the drive and the inclination and the core and saying, how's self-image doing? Okay, take another point of self-image. That works for you. And so you're fluctuating, and it's an important score. And then finally you have ties and antipathies. The
Mm.
characters you're close to and are sympathetic toward, the characters that you're antagonistic to and don't want good things to happen for. And those are scores, and you do things with them.
Oh, cool.
So
That's
it's a
interesting.
pretty broad set of mechanics. It's not just one.
Yeah.
It's really pretty, and they are very explicit. This is what you follow. This is what you do. This is how you look at play. This is how
Mm.
you know, this is how you follow what happens. This is what your character is basically for.
Yeah.
And then I look at all the military stuff in there, all the violence, and I'm aha, now I know how to play this game. The more danger and uncertainty that I put characters into, the more these relationships are going to develop.
Mm.
The more troublesome and complicated and nuanced and plain physically dangerous their circumstances, the more they have to guess, the more they have to risk this but not risk that, or be willing to die for this and not willing to die for that. The more that happens, the more those scores become things you roll for and roll against.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at it and I'm going, damn, I could play some albedo. I really could, because this is going to look like, and one could say, well, yeah, like a comic book. Yes, but it was that kind of comic book.
Mm.
That it follows that same logic that makes these long TV series powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that to me is one of the few things where I look at it and say, aha, science fiction television, science fiction role playing, whether it's convergent or one influences the other, I don't know, but the language is the same.
Yeah.
And so many of the other science fiction, games that I have, they are science fiction and they are role playing, but they don't seem to have much of that feature. And
Yeah.
and they don't seem
Hmm.
to, am I wrong? They don't seem to be, with some exceptions, they don't seem to be as socially critical as the television.
You mean as big as an influence?
No, well, I think I'm looking at the games
Oh,
themselves.
socially critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. I mean, hmm.
I mean, does Fading
Hmm.
Suns really criticize anything about the world we live in or hold it up for
Yeah.
scrutiny? I mean, and that's
Hmm.
another game that I've played and wouldn't mind playing again because I like certain aspects of it, of the setting, but I don't think of it as, I think of it as
Uh,
kind of like adventure spectacle, but I don't really think of it as, it's not like Farscape where they're like screwing American politics with every single episode.
yeah, I'm trying to think.
Um,
I don't know which other are popular. The Warhammer games, the one in the future
right,
4000.
right.
I mean, they have the potential. I don't really know if they explore those kinds of things.
we know the stereotype of Warhammer 40K players. The stereotype, of course, is that they want to play orc space marines and kill everything, and that's the end of that. But I don't know
Yeah.
if that's true. Then you have the weirdos. You have good old, turning around everything I just said, of course, is Jason Morningstar with Durance.
Well, yeah,
And
but
so, right,
those are pre-reasons.
right, exactly. Now we are talking about, people who are going to be doing really, really crazy stuff, really intense stuff. But Durance did strike me if you played it slow. The reason I brought
Hmm.
it up, if you played it slow, not just over and done in one session, okay, all of the commitments are over and all of the climactic moments have happened and everybody's dead and okay, we're done. If you don't play it that way, if you play it kind of slow, I would watch that show.
Hmm.
I would watch that. That's nuanced. That's interesting. That's
Hmm.
disturbing. In fact, um,
Uh, so another example that maybe is not like that is kind of current, but it's not as part of the as big as part of the indie scene. Maybe Hand the Wicked. I think I have it somewhere here.
well, tell me
It's
about
a
that.
it's a small it's a fair game in which you play bounty hunters.
Hmm. Right.
The idea of the universe is the future. There's three races, and there's this machine god that rules the whole universe, but he's sleeping. As long the only thing he doesn't want is for too much chaos. If like a species start to go to war and cause too much trouble, he wakes up and exterminates a few like thousands and
Right.
goes back to
Right.
sleep.
Well,
There's some stuff there about I think there's some potential there for kind of exploring the justification to of crimes and that kind of stuff. Like if people deserve to be like judged, if it's like a fair thing, that kind of stuff. It is still pretty recent, but yeah.
Bounty Hunter is very popular in role playing games. Science
Yeah,
fiction
yeah.
role playing games. It's almost always a character archetype or class, and it also there's a game called Manhunter, which is very much about there's lots of aliens and there's lots of cyborgs and now the characters in Cowboy Bebop are bounty hunters,
Yeah.
but and some of the episodes are based on that, but in many ways it's kind of their background job. It's not like the show's about that.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to say there's nothing, but it does seem to me that that's a bit of a mismatch. You don't have a lot of that on TV, but you do have a lot of that in role playing. That seems to be another sort of way that role playing science fiction is different from
Mhm.
TV science fiction, at least in terms of emphasis. Are you familiar with? I don't didn't bring it up with me. Are you familiar with Justifiers?
No.
Justifiers was an '80s game, also anamorphic. The
Hmm.
characters are genetically modified animals so that they're humanoid, and they have a really shitty job. They're
Hmm.
owned by the corporations that have made them, and they have to pay off their cost by service to the corporation, which means they have
Hmm.
to go to planets that have been claimed by the corporation to go and see how valuable they are and to lay claim to them. So they're basically colonial shock troops, you know. And what's interesting is how deeply and carefully he worked on racism through
Hmm.
the game is short and there's a series of short supplements and the clarity of the racist nature of what's going on is exceptionally well done. It's
Hmm.
really not uh I mean the corporation wants you to go and buy your freedom or
Yeah.
but of course they keep saying well you broke that so your cost just went up so too bad,
Yeah.
that happens a lot. It's a little hard to imagine and I could be wrong but it's a little hard to imagine any group believing that or buying into it and not trying to strike back, or go
Mm.
rogue or to find some other way. And there's lots of avenues in the setting for some kind of taking a new approach toward your own ethnicity and society in general. There are
Mm.
some ways to do it or some opportunities that are evident in the setting. But it's kind of funny. I mean, the book is predicated on you're a justifier and you're trying to buy your freedom through service. That's sort of the given. But then you're reading it and you're playing it, which I've done with using a couple of systems, and you're kind of going, you know what? This is a really bad idea. I don't want my guy to do this anymore. We have to find some other way.
Mm.
And
That's interesting.
yeah, so it actually it's a loved setting. Different people have tried to reboot it at different times. But it's one of the few where the science fiction really highlights a pretty
Yeah.
brutal and very uncompromising social question. I mean, it's really not very compromising at all.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
guess the most popular attempt at doing that kind of thing is Shadowrun on the more cyberpunky kind of things.
Tell me more
Which
about that because Shadowrun is another one of these games which is all things to all people, and so I don't know all the angles that you would take with that.
I mean, r- racism is definitely a part of cyberpunk of the things he tries to explore. Um, but he uses the metaphor theme where like instead of being like white and black and Latino that kind of stuff, you have like orcs and elves and
Right,
that kind of thing. You have basically the KKK version of it, which is humans that think like, oh, all the non-human races are
right.
impure or whatever. So it does try to do that. I don't know if it really uh, succeeds, but it is certainly a game that has tried to deal with those things very openly.
I love that kind of social science fiction,
Mhm.
and I don't mind if the science fiction is very excessive, right? Full of crazy aliens and stuff like that. That's great.
Mhm.
This is a game that never got published past its ashcan. From at least I don't think so. Proper introductory edition, right? Paper covers. Psych. Super technologically savvy lizards
Mhm.
have moved into Earth and set up their own subcontinent, basically, and consider themselves to own the planet now. And they like people, and they start dressing like people, and they start acting like people. They assimilate, but they assimilate down as a hobby, as for because it's fun for them. And they have different factions with different politics and stuff like that. The way they do it actually ends up being fascinatingly critical of real Earth.
Mhm.
And you play and you kind of have to be honest about what you do and don't like about your own real life because
Mhm.
the science fiction is played so close to how these aliens or beings integrate with pop culture, how they think the governments of Earth ought to do their jobs and stuff like that, because they don't really feel like ruling. They don't. That would be boring. That would be work. So the politics are all distorted because of their presence, but it's not as though they really take over all the governments. They're not going to do that.
Mhm.
So therefore, you have yeah, it's kind of actually pretty intelligent. You have you're looking at your own world that's been distorted by this,
Mhm.
and where it goes from there, it's kind of a good question. But it's got to go somewhere. I mean, the this is where you get that kind of Babylon 5 or what they tried to do in Battlestar Galactica, which is to try to tell the grand story at the same time as telling the people stories.
Yeah.
And that was a setting, that was a game that was, you could tell that's what was on their minds. right?
Mhm.
There's so much material in there which is just begging for expression during play.
Yeah, so like the main question that we're finding is what happened? Why is this absence of those things that are so present in other medium
Right.
science fictions that didn't get like, translated into role playing games?
And I will be fair. I keep saying maybe it does get translated into role playing as an activity,
Hmm.
but it certainly seems rare or
Hmm.
de-emphasized in the texts. You mentioned cyberpunk as
Yeah,
a thing, and cyberpunk is really carefully developed in role playing.
yeah.
Um, how much of it really is there in science fiction television? I mean, there's Max Headroom, which was very much so. I don't find a Max Headroom style role playing game. If anybody knows of one, I'll play it for sure. But I don't know if you're familiar with that show. It was an '80s show that was kind of before cyber. Well, this is the interesting thing. Before cyberpunk discovered anime, it was a lot different, you know. And so and so Max Headroom was very uh, much pre-anime cyberpunk.
Hmm.
So it's quirky and gritty and sometimes comedic and sometimes very messagey social science fiction, sometimes really thoughtful, but
Hmm.
it's not cool,
Right.
right? Cyberpunk, the role-playing game in 1989, the very first version of it, which people now call 2013, was actually pretty dark.
Hmm.
I mean, pretty unpleasant. It's a dystopia,
Yeah.
and you are as far as the core text is concerned, it seems likely that your characters are going to become political criminals, terrorists, and and or at least be the kind of criminals that are striking political blows through
Yeah.
their thefts and stuff like that. Or if you're a celebrity, you're trying to do good. If you're a corporate guy, well, again, it's kind of hard to say, but the text leans toward fighting the machine very
Yeah. Yeah.
much. Fight the man, fight the machine.
Yeah.
Even though the world is doomed, you know, you're gonna. Where's your dignity, for God's sake? You know.
Yeah.
And what are you gonna do? Just buy shit? And so it's so that after that, Cyberpunk. That's why I think of Cyberpunk 2020 as just a very different game.
Hmm.
Because I don't feel like it has that quality, but someone might argue with me. But science fiction, cyberpunk in role playing games because became basically a superpowered set.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
Because the influence of anime, like there's some really, really great cyberpunk anime,
Right.
but it also looks so cool
Right.
that, of course, doing the interesting political, philosophical reflections is hard.
I was not a sympathetic anime watcher. I liked a few things. I liked this movie or that thing, right? I didn't follow the TV shows much and, wasn't really, I didn't look for it.
Mhm.
And one day, I didn't hate it, but I didn't like try to find it. I didn't watch like all the Devilman or anything like that. And
Oh,
so I
Devilman.
know it's great and everything. I just didn't do it, is what I'm saying, right? And so I wasn't really that kind of I didn't pursue it. Sometime later, a friend of mine who hates manga and anime, they're haters, right?
Yeah,
Well, this is a friend who is, and she told me, except for the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex.
of course.
Now, and I actually had watched the movie with her, and we
Mhm.
liked it. So, and I'd always said, "Oh yeah, I really like that movie. It's does Blade Runner better than Blade Runner. This is really good, right?" And so, So I'd always liked the movie, and I had no idea there was a an ongoing manga. Of course, if I'd thought about it for 10 seconds, I would have known there was an
In
ongoing
fact,
manga.
the
Right?
manga came first.
I know, but the experts all know this.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't care,
yeah.
and so, but I learned though later because I watched the show, and I don't think I'm surprising anybody by saying it's one of the most intelligent TV shows I've ever seen, and genuinely fascinating and genuinely thoughtful, and all kinds of things. And I look at it and I say, wow, where is our Ghost in the Shell role playing game?
Hmm.
And I look around, and there was a generic system in the 90s called Amazing Engine that only put out a couple of setting packs.
Hmm.
One of them, there are three that I can think of actually, and one of them was called Bug Hunters.
Hmm.
And Bug Hunters was basically a cross between Blade Runner and Aliens. And ultimately, if you read it, it really emphasized who are you
Hmm.
as one of these replicated cyborgy, those people. Who are you as a manufactured or mostly manufactured human being? And it's pretty good. I mean, the game leans that way so hard in all of its components that you can kind of tell that hunting down the aliens is kind of the backdrop for this. And there's a couple of others. I actually, when I started deciding I was going to design role playing games seriously, one of them was called. I have two drafts that
Hmm.
are have never been made, that have never been shown to the light of day, just because I have never got them to a scanner. But they were very influential on a lot of games that were produced at the Forge because people read the drafts. One was called Fantasy for Real, and it was based on very unrealistic fantasy.
Hmm.
And then another one was called The Human Machine,
Hmm.
and it was based very much on the humanistic side of all of these, the humanistic side of Blade Runner, the humanistic side of Terminator, the humanistic side of Ghost in the Shell, going actually back to the original novel called Cyborg,
Hmm.
and drawing upon the better parts of the TV show The $6 Million Man, which
Hmm.
is incredibly influential. I should point out that Wolverine became a cyborg just after that show was released, for example. But what I'm saying though is that I immediately thought, wow, we need a role playing game that really goes here. So I had memory mechanics and stuff like that. So this was around 1999, um,
Hmm.
and so there must be some games like that though, right?
New ones,
Hmm.
a few, but
Yeah,
not that many. Recent games, you have the Veil, which is one of the PBTA of offsprings, which is explicitly this game. This game attempts to be about this kind of thing, like it's explicitly about answering a philosophical question. Like you start the setting like with a and you come up with a question. Can robots have feelings or whatever?
right.
Probably something more interesting than that. Yeah, you have these questions, and you have like an agent that has its own answer, and there's some stuff there where you are trying to answer these questions, and it's cyberpunk, but also post-humanistic and that kind of stuff. So it is definitely trying to do that.
Yeah,
I think it does some things good, well, and some others not so much, but it's in the good direction. But there's not much more about uh, other than that. Like there's games
yeah.
that are about doing things, but there's not really anything else.
There's a
Most.
lot of games where there's long lists of how much this cyber limb can lift and how fast these legs can run and how much damage, how much of a door can you punch through with your cyber arm. There's a lot of that.
And I
Yeah.
And again, it's not that they're not aware of all that stuff. Like Shadowrun it does try all of that. It's just I don't know how much it exists.
Right. The I was also going to point out this isn't the same genre necessarily, but it is the trippy cyberpunk, which would be Headspace.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which is definitely a science fiction show in a social
Oh yeah. Yeah.
situation.
I think about it. Yeah.
And so it does aim at, especially in longer term play, seems to aim at getting much more of a political approach. Um, but
I mean, you are literally like that's the whole thing. You
right.
are a group of people fighting against the system.
Right, but it's not just repetitive. Mark took some effort to say, well, what does play look like down the road?
Oh, that's
After
cool.
you've had a couple of ups and downs, after you've had adventures, how
Hmm.
does play change? There seems to be some effort toward that, which is a good thing. So I guess I'm saying I'm bringing it up, and why science fiction TV? Well, because science fiction TV has such a presence, you know,
Hmm.
especially because when I was a kid, science fiction television was what you threw away. You know, it was considered the ass end of television. The the idea that these could become more iconic, and nobody thought that all these 14-year-old boys were going to grow up and have buying power one day. That we would still want to have our Star Trek action figures at the
Hmm.
age of 45, right? Nobody was thinking about that. That was ridiculous. And so everybody thought of it as just point and shoot. You know, show's canceled, fine. Next show's going to mine its scripts, right? No problem. I mean, they hardly ever made it into syndication. I'm sure somebody's analyzed it academically, but science fiction TV as throwaway junk that was surprisingly good that allowed thoughtful people to come in and do some really wild things when nobody was looking. Um, and I just maybe I'm just being mean, but has role playing been a little bit? I mean, it's had more freedom than TV. Has TV been braver than role playing with its
Hmm.
science fiction? Even though TV has been more subordinated to commercial and social concerns to be less threatening.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, I don't know what
Yes.
the answer is, but that's what it feels like.
Hmm.
Even though I can
Yeah.
point to some pretty interesting examples in role playing, but they do seem a little bit. I mean, how many of the games that I talk about are out of print or never made it to print, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and even the more recent ones are clearly an answer like to that kind of thing, like saying we are trying to do this thing that has never been done before. Really, uh, is interesting. I mean, I guess because if you want to like talking, like making good points about political issues and social stuff is hard. Like you cannot ask people. Well, it's hard to ask that from people in their homes on their own. And if you want to kind of codify that, you have to be it's probably you have to be very specific. Like, okay, you are going to be these people who are doing this thing in this setting, and you can like the justifier things.
Right, that's who you are.
You,
You're playing one. Period.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you cannot really be going around in a space doing whatever.
Right, exactly. And even but if you look at science fiction TV where the characters can go around in space and do whatever, those are often very politically charged shows too.
Hmm. But how
So,
would
yeah.
you translate that into an RPG, especially like some time ago? I guess with a very specific setting, with that was very politically charged.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really interesting because a lot of the games do have factions and politics among them are a big part of the setting. But they again, I'm being very uncharitable. They just don't have the disturbing nuances of, for example, the peacekeepers in Farscape.
mm,
Even the name peacekeepers. is taken from American spin politics. The show is played for a lot of comedy a lot of times, but not when it came to that stuff. I just don't see that when I look at the different factions of the politics of these elaborate settings.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, and I'd love to be corrected. Anybody who knows about that, I'll play the game. And I know that there are some. I mean, I've found enough interesting individual examples. There was a game, boy, talking about never published games or barely published games. There was one called Center Space from the early 2000s.
Hmm.
Um, it had a D20 incarnation briefly. The setting was amazing. The setting was the most gonzo, crazy, transhuman, no holds barred, just almost ridiculous bug aliens and cyborgs and demons from other dimensions and everything. You just take the geek bucket and you just empty the geek bucket, right?
Hmm.
And it had the best critical, dramatic distortion of the United States, Europe, and Israel and the relationships among them that I've ever seen. And it's so freaking explicit. I mean, you read it and you like map it out and you're like, it's not an accident. It can't be an accident. It's just too precise. And so that's another one, but it's it's not just a matter of dressing it up. It's a matter of finding the things that disturb you,
Hmm.
that in polite company you don't say, but in this setting, it's right in your face because it's that kind of cyborg,
Hmm.
you know, and so you get away with saying it because it's so blatant and so gaudy. It's got lights that bleep and three arms or some shit like that, right? And so which is what science fiction is really good at.
Yeah.
And I I keep coming up with examples that are things that are exactly what I'm looking for. So maybe I'm just being a jerk, but it just seems like the big ones, the most. There's
I mean,
something missing.
it's true that uh, this kind of thing is like one of the main characteristics of a lot of cyberpunk in other medium. People will think, okay, you either have like a Star Wars, but
Right,
you the other big thing is like a 2001: A Space Odyssey.
right, or right.
But
If either it's fluff or it'll blow your mind.
yeah,
If
that
that's
kind
the
of stuff.
stereotype, I can think of things that are both, and that's fine. But that is kind of the stereotype.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in role playing games, yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest one that tries to do that again is Shadowrun, and I cannot attest for it. I think it tries very hard, but for what I've read, yeah, kind of
Yeah.
succeed,
Yeah.
but not completely. I don't think it has enough of a punch,
Hmm.
especially because the orc elf metaphor is kind of is not too good because like different ethnicities in the real world kind of live cars or
Right.
have like or live forever or that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, other than that, yeah, it seems like a very big theme that is a little bit absent from role playing games.
Or at least underserved. And it just seems as though that edge or that commentary or that particular driving
Hmm.
critique of life is not as served by the games as it is in the other media. And again, I'm picking on TV because TV is both, for the most part, science fiction has been junk from the point of view of the people paying for it,
Mm.
and it's also been it's TV. You can't be as explicit or vicious or as blunt as you are in printed science fiction.
I mean, I guess that's also part of it. Like one thing is like showing you a movie where these people get into complicated moral questions and all that. Another telling you, hey, you have to now question your way of life or your your conception of life or the consciousness or
Well, that leads us to something about role playing then. I mean, I don't want to be too artistic here, but most story oriented fictional media have at least a fair portion of them that does that.
mm,
And it's not always just the big expensive one from the famous authors. I mean, that's the thing. People, a lot of the junk culture of printed media, for example, or TV, turns out to be the more powerful.
mm.
A lot of it, a lot of the time. Um, and is role playing, is it, is, when you buy a science fiction game, role playing game, are you doing it because you like to role play science fiction, or are you doing it because you're a science fiction fan?
Hmm.
And that's a really harsh thing to say. But it's like, do you watch the science fiction TV show because you like that show and you want to do this with your time, or is this part of being a science fiction fan? Those things can overlap, but they are two different things.
I have the intuition that that may be different things because I do like properties that I do like as fiction in other media. I don't really feel like the need to bring them in a role playing game unless in a very specific way.
I actually would have always avoided playing hard science fiction, technologically oriented science fiction in role playing. I have very,
Mm.
very low experience in the games because I have such a difficult relationship with it as fandom. I love the science fiction. I don't like science fiction fandom very much. I look at the role playing games and I don't want to do it because
Mm.
it has that quality to me.
I mean, one
And
thing that I found in the wild that was curious to me is that I was interested in the Warhammer 4000 setting, kind of, especially in the Inquisitor type
mhm.
guys. I don't know what's the name exactly. Um and I found a guy, a friend who was like really into that kind of setting, and I said, "Hey, why don't we take like a cool system like one of those Blaze in the Dark hacks or whatever and play with it?" And he was like, "I don't know. I have too much respect for the setting. I don't see myself capacitated to run a game in it."
That's interesting too.
No, I think when he said respect, he didn't mean that uh, he didn't want it to be to play in a role playing game. It was that didn't see himself capacitated to do it
Right,
in
right.
to the standard he was.
That's interesting too, though. I mean, it's does that mean that he has lower standards for other settings? Or maybe he
I
just feels that he's
guess.
good enough at it. I don't know if there is any way on this earth that I and some friends could produce something as intelligent as Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. But I'd like to try. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to try.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess that may be a side effect of fandom.
mhm.
That kind of respect and that those kind of idea of having this setting and this in a pedestal that you don't that maybe
It's
some
like,
people don't want to mess around
you know
with
what?
it.
Maybe role playing would be considered by people fanfic rather than doing it.
Yeah.
That is a really important question. And there is a branch of fandom that despises fanfic,
Hmm.
right?
And I
So,
know
yeah,
on the other hand, I know some people who are like, I take Star Wars. What I really like about it is messing up with the setting and doing my own thing with it. So this some of that too.
But I agree, but both of them seem to have the same basic idea that role playing is your fanfic. And then
Yeah,
these guys like to do it, and that guy says, no, that's fans should keep
that
their grubby fingers out of the good stuff, you know.
yeah that they're
That,
messing with
yeah,
something.
yeah. That's and so but it's the same attitude that role playing in and of itself is
A lesser form.
yeah, unprofessional maybe, whatever, something, you know. And so
Hmm.
the idea that the creators are over here doing the good stuff and the audience is consuming the good stuff, and then the audience can, like, you know, finger paint if they want to, right? You know. So and so that's kind of an interesting question. I don't know if we have an answer for it, but I bet that that's close to the variable. Because the text will never be anything but text. They're words on a page.
Right. Right.
And so, for example, tonight I was talking about science fiction role playing, and I don't know if you've done very much of it.
Not enough. That's something I really am kind of going into now. Like I'm actually kind of like not doing a lot of fantasy.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know,
yeah.
you got it's like I was talking about it, but this time for genre. You know, you finally got it.
Right, yeah.
You felt it. You were like, okay, oh my goodness, I can do something else now. But
Right.
the thing I was talking about with my friend, and it was very tentative, was, does role playing science fiction fulfill what, and I was using TV. I tried to keep it focused. I said, never mind movies, never mind. Let's do TV science fiction. Partly because TV science fiction, through most of its history, was junk.
Right.
Right. They didn't, the people doing it, except when a writer got in there or a particular producer or somebody with, you know, a passion was involved. It was the throwaway part of TV. And
Right.
and so not only that, but television in and of itself was subject to a lot of mainstream constraints that the fiction wasn't.
Right. Oh, yeah,
So
absolutely.
therefore, science fiction TV nevertheless managed more often than not to do what science fiction does best and knee the dominant culture in the balls.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And find a way to do it that was exciting or provocative or fascinating or any number of things. And so more often than not, and in many ways where you just would not expect it, you know, you're like, this is obviously a complete knockoff. What was the one that really struck me in recent years, although it's not recent now? um I was walking down the street and talking to a friend, and I said, you know, it's the weirdest thing. The you know, the Sarah Connor TV show,
Right.
as I was saying to my friend, that thing has no reason to exist. It's a bunch of people who were total geeks for Terminator 2,
Right.
grew
Yeah.
up, you know, probably, you know, I'm not even going to say, probably developing their early masculine sexual, you
Right.
know, skills um on Sarah Connor, you know, thinking
Right.
about Sarah
Exactly.
Connor, and now they get to make a TV show about her, okay? And the franchise as such, we need no more time travel in there. We were done,
Right.
you know, it's way past the point where we need any more time travel, people jumping around and stuff like that. That thing has no reason, intellectual or whatever, to exist. I do not want to watch these guys basically recapitulating, jerking off over Sarah Connor. But you know what? That's
Right.
a pretty freaking good show, you know, and it has no reason to exist. But you know what? Somebody somehow is actually making that a very enjoyable, very thought provoking show of its own. Never mind the rest of it.
Right.
Never mind how it's related to the rest of it. Just, it's pretty good. And I was walking down the street talking like this, pontificating in a geek fashion. And this woman walking past us turns and addresses us and says, you know what? You nailed it. I feel exactly the same way. And this woman out of nowhere, right?
Wow.
And so and so my take though is that you just can't go by premise. You can't go by pitch.
Right.
You can't go by, okay, this is what it looks like on paper. Sometimes the science fiction's really powerful. as such.
Right.
I actually take it to the point in the show, now that I'm thinking about it. There's a point in the show when she actually says, you know what, we're domestic terrorists.
Yeah.
We are, you know,
Yeah.
we just, and that she was actually using it as a threat. She was like, you do understand you're talking to domestic terrorists, right? You know, and I was like, wow, and what was it, 2005, 2006, whatever it was, somebody had the guts to say that with a protagonist of a mainstream American television show.
Yeah, it's because science fiction has
Wow.
always been able to take the gloves off. Science fiction
Exactly.
can do these. Yeah,
Exactly.
that
Yeah, the
was
censors are
one thing I
stupid.
figured out
They're
as a
looking
kid.
for tits, right? And they don't
Yeah.
see tits, they say okay, right? And so I was like, wow, you know, and so but this was my question tonight was, has science fiction role playing gone all the way with that feature in science fiction? And I thought of a few examples, but then I was going, yeah, but in science fiction TV of all places, it's more the norm than one might think. You know, I was thinking too about the comedy show from the 90s, Third Rock from the Sun. Man, they skewered everything.
Right.
You know, comedy schmomedy, you know,
Right.
the funniest thing ever, and they totally just eviscerated everything about 90s romance, you know,
Yeah.
just eviscerated it. And
I think you need the "I will not abandon you" like clause.
yeah, totally.
Really plant some gloves off sci-fi, you know.
I completely agree. And so, but I'm looking across role playing and saying, I think I see some of it here and there, but a lot of it really does seem to be sort of military porn.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't know. I mean, is that something that happens at the table? Do people playing, you know, Warhammer 40K, do they do that at the table with it? You know, I don't want to say they
Right.
don't, because, you know, that would be very much of a low blow on my part, and I don't know. But or especially with the licensed properties in particular, there's been what, 5 Star Trek role playing games.
Yep. I'm currently playing in the latest one. You know,
And that's the question. I mean, I don't want to sound like a real super old fart who says there's only one Star Trek,
right.
except that I kind of feel it. And
Right.
so I don't want to go to there, but let's take a lot of the original show. And I will allow as plenty of pieces here and there throughout the franchise as well,
Right.
where the gloves came off.
Oh, they always are off. I mean,
yeah, and
you have to put in the context of the time, because now it seems tame, but then
some of it doesn't seem tame. I mean, I think I was talking with a younger person tonight, and I was talking about let that be your last battlefield.
Yeah.
And he didn't know the episode, and he didn't expect the ending.
Yeah.
He didn't expect the ending where they just kill each other. They kill each other in the ruins of their planet.
Yeah.
And this is not the later claims of Star Trek as the great idealistic show. Dude, you show me an idealistic episode in that first season or that first series.
Oh, there isn't any.
They're hard. Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal as hell. And I mean, nearly all of them. And so, I mean, I remember I was watching the old series. My wife hadn't seen hardly any of them, and when I got them, you know, but to me, watching them on my old shitty black and white set, you know, bootlegging episodes at my friends' houses and stuff, to actually sit down and watch them on DVD was like, you know, wow, you know, is this allowed? Is this legal? You know?
Right.
And so, but my point is, she watched Charlie X, which is an early episode from the first season. And she was like, that is the most brutal, devastating thing I think I've ever seen. They showed this on TV.
Yeah.
You know? And, I think so. Anyway, okay, let's give the franchise some credit that it wasn't just that one series. I personally, you can see where I'm coming from. I think the rest of Trek is sugar coated, but I'll get over it. Right?
It's a different genre.
Yeah,
It's a different thing.
So let's take your current experience. You're actually that's fantastic that you're playing. I don't know which game you're playing.
It's a Modiphius 2D20
Okay,
thing,
yeah.
which we're having fun, but it tends to push you in this very much next generation sort of feel, and there's like the mechanics actually promote kind of like this slow build of threat. They call it. There's like a negative quantity the game master has, and they can then dump it on you. And it's cool for that sort of like, okay, it's right before the third commercial, boom, and here's a cliffhanger. And like, how are they going to get out of that?
So yeah, structurally,
But what it doesn't have James T. Kirk beating the crap out of some dude, and kissing his wife, that's the part that like it emulates that kind of, we came, we saw, we conquered, like everything's going to be okay. Maybe it's a little sad because these people are still sterile, but we're going to get the Federation doctors to come back and help. But it's not that total hopeless, like you. It's not that, I forget which episode that is, but at the end, it's the one where they go back in time and they realize this woman has to die.
Right, City on the Edge of Forever.
Classic. And the last line is that Jim just says, "Let's get the hell out." It doesn't have that.
Yeah,
it doesn't have that.
Yeah, and I could go on. There's my favorite episode is called A Private Little War, and it's one of several Vietnam episodes. And and savage, just savage. They can't. The worst part is that it's the Federation, the Klingons, who can't do it right.
Right.
And the principals know it. They know it. They, even while they're caught in it, and they feel obliged to carry out Federation policy and all the rest of it, and they're like, we're ruining it. We're ruining it. When the noble savage hero of the episode, at the end of it all, turns to Kirk with the guns that they have provided for them, right?
Snakes for the Garden of Eden.
Yeah. And he exactly. And he says, "More, Kirk. I want more of these."
Right.
And Kirk is just like, that's exactly what I've been pushing for this whole episode, and I feel like shit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it's really, to me, that's what I'm talking about, where I'm not, it was a very tentative idea that although for better or for worse, role-playing invented its own genre of fantasy.
Right.
Did it invent its own genre of science fiction? And if so, is it, well, let's be blunt, is it any good? At least in that variable. At least in
not having played enough. Not having played enough. I mean, there's probably the military fantasy is probably what's the most common. I mean, there is the exploration traveler kind of like sort of thing, but there were two things that always kind of prevented me from playing a lot of it. The first one was I couldn't wrap my head around the idea. I was stuck with hit points, but like, man, Reagan will kill you. It's just one shot, you're done.
Right.
It's not like you can kind of justify. Oh, it was a grazing blow from the sword. No, it's like you're done.
Right.
But the other thing was that I've always known, like that was the gig of sci-fi, is it examines these really tough things. It can dial everything up to 11 because it can, and it can explore these really unpleasant subjects, or just because there are no constraints. And I don't know. Yeah, I'd love to play a role-playing game like that. It might be disturbing. I mean, like, actually, there's a game that's on our list to play. It's called Broken Rooms. It's another one by Ray Malkin Designs, and it's a pretty simple system. The system doesn't, uses D12s, which I think is awesome because nobody does. It's the loneliest die in the box.
Which is terrible because it's the only one that makes any mathematical sense.
Yeah,
12 is better than 10. We all know that.
Exactly. But yeah, it's a dozen. But the setting, as when you were talking about the idea of like, where's the bounce? That's one of these games that, it's so disturbing.
Yeah.
And I actually talked to the creator, and the creator does not put the meta plot in the book. He kind of leaves it hang, but he goes, "You really want to know?" I'm like, "Yeah, and it's ruined for me as a player, but I want to run it because you find really like, oh my God, are you really?
Yeah.
You should probably talk to a professional or something.
That's right. Not right. It's not right. Yes. But how many science fiction writers have you said that about? I mean, I certainly have. You're like Harlan.
Yeah.
Harlan, you know,
Yeah, but
you want to get a back rub or something, you know.
yeah, exactly. But every it's like 13 different parallel worlds, but all the parallel worlds that like us ours diverge from that. That's the setting. Every single one, there's only certain people that can move throughout them. The player characters are some of them. Every single one, there's a cataclysm,
Right.
and there you will meet versions of different people, and like there's like a black hole is coming. Everybody that you meet there, including the little girl that says, please, sir, can you help me? They're all going to die, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
Right. Right.
And it's profoundly, and there's other elements in the game about you have to deal with loss and everything. That's part of the gig. It's disturbing to read. I want to play it because it's got to be disturbing to play.
Right. Well, there was, I just reread a collection of stories from the mid 70s called Chains of the Sea, and it had the up and coming authors, many of whose books I've read, and they were all the post Dangerous Visions pessimists. People like George Alec Effinger and people like that, and not a single one of their books is any fun. They're all brutal. They're often very, very good, but they are just grim as hell, and grim in just grinding emotional downer ways, you know. And I ultimately decided that I wanted something a little different from my science fiction, but I sort of appreciated that there was no other. It was funny, you know, they would the professors would say, and this is like these dark realms of existential fiction, and you read it, you know, some 20th century novel, you know, that's supposed to be the depths of the depths and the human spirit at its its weakest and all the rest of it. You're like, fuck you, man, I read George Alec Effinger. You know, that ain't shit. You know? And so you need to go over and read some of this stuff. You know, we have our depths of existential despair. We've got that over there. And so so I know what you're talking about. I'm not doing a game like Shock, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with Shock. Shock is a build your own science fiction game where it is specifically about the shock to social values that a particular tech or circumstance has brought. So by definition, you're playing that kind of science fiction, and you know you're doing it, and it is often disturbing because that's what we do here. You know, and so I'm not talking about that where it's kind of explicitly there for you to make. I'm thinking more about ones like what you're talking about, where the vision is external. It is someone's, you know,
the settings there are just are crazy.
Right. Yeah. And I'm thinking of a few others that kind of do that, and maybe I'm just being greedy. I'm saying I don't think there's enough.
Right. No, I gotcha.
You know, and
there is that other realism part in that Broken Rooms game, because they did really good job with each setting, each like parallel world, and there's something, you know, one of them has like the black hole, one of them has there's some kind of invisible monsters only children can see. Well, what do you think's going to happen to them? They're going to give the children guns and make them protect everybody else. So they have child wars. Every single one they did a really good, like, what would really happen to society? How would people act if this were the case? And it is horrific, and and it's just disturbing to realize. Now, if I showed up there, if I was James, you know, it's almost like being James Kirk showing up to like this twisted. Man, this is horrible.
And it's not horrible. And you're not there to fix it, right?
And you're not there, and you can't.
Right. That's one thing that I found really interesting about post-Trek shows. When Babylon 5 sort of said, you're not the only kid on the block anymore, you know, and then things proliferated through all the different cable channels and stuff like that. And there were two shows in the late 90s that are often thought of as kind of twins in some ways. They're both excessive as hell. One is a German-Canadian production, and one of them has American actors as leads mostly, but is effectively an Australian production. And so the first one's Lex, and the second
one is
Farscape. Right.
Every night when they were on, I'd watch.
Yeah. And what amazed me about Farscape, and well, Lex was easy because the Germans were happily being Berliners and causing as much trouble as they could. And so the fact that it was, sort of Red Dwarf turned grotty, is not too surprising. But not to mention witty in lots of ways. And one thing about Lex that I liked was they weren't afraid to fail. If a given episode tanked, fine, we've got another one,
Yeah.
And so but Farscape, you're kind of like, are you doing what I see you doing? I mean, are you really going to go there? And the fact that they decided to crank it up as they went along, rather than they could have fallen into a groove because they had Ben Browder and they had fun and they had their fan base and they could have coasted. After that first season, they could have coasted, and they didn't.
Right.
That's what sort of impressed me. And
I'm glad I found another fan because I used to watch those religiously.
Oh, it's
and I kind of knew where you're going. I'm like, oh my god, is he gonna say Lex Farscape?
Yeah. Once you get through that door, though, science fiction is blown open on TV. You can do anything now, and so I was kind of at that point. You're kind of like, yeah, you know what? There's no more king of the block on science fiction TV. Everybody can do anything, and as soon as you have what was it? One reviewer said, yes, there is a tribute to the fetish scene in Australia, and with a little science fiction on top, but I think that what I'm saying is I'm kind of going, all right, there's a Farscape role-playing game. It's licensed.
Right.
I don't know it, and for all I know, it is incredible.
Right.
Oh, but that bad side of me says, but if you're taking bets, I'm taking the other side. I mean, and maybe I'm scarred by the Babylon Project, which was the role-playing game for Babylon 5.
That I didn't see.
Well, we played it while we were watching Babylon 5 very excitedly. Right. And we got the game, right? And we played. And you know what? The licensing wouldn't permit anything except the first season, or maybe a little more, maybe the second. And it was dull. It was dull. Everything, you said, well, there's this race. And, well, there's this race.
Right.
It's like, no, that's not what the show is. And so, the show is the breakdown of the UN is what the show is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where is this? And they make a big deal of, well, you can play this crew member, you can play a runaway psionic dude. Don't go near the main characters. The main characters are doing their main character stuff.
Right.
You go over there. It's really cool over there in the station. See, we mapped it for you.
Right.
And you're like, yeah, but
what does this fantasy book here? What game does that? Or or what the hell does sci-fi? Or like that kind of sci-fi? I'm pointing at the disturbing books now, and that's interesting. Like figuring out well, how can we? And once again, like what parts of the game, are we? Where are we filling in the hole? Do we not even know we're filling in the holes? And then all of a sudden you look back and think,
well, it's important.
Fascinating stuff.
It's important to me that textual system design be a springboard, right?
Right.
You don't want to just lock down everything into the descriptive, quantification of all this stuff. If I know what are it's what people said about deities and demigods, which in many ways was a labor of love, but in other ways it's like, no, you gave hit points to Cthulhu, really?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want to think about with some of this science fiction is
right. Exactly.
Got me thinking.
Right on.
I think I never been interested in playing science fiction role-playing game. some setting could be interesting, but they were associated with terrible system or the other way around. But in general, it was like they want to use science fiction setting without science fiction.
There are some pretty weird and interesting science fiction games. Perfect, this is the first edition. Games like Remember Tomorrow, which is sort of the new school cyberpunk game. And then there's Durance, right, which is about a prison planet, um, and or prison colony. And there are others that have more, direct impact, but they tend to be very focused games. You also, I mean, focused in the sense of what Ken Hite called boutique games, really. Kind of small, specialized, focused experience games. Not in the sense of, here is this grand setting, with a lot of content. That
They're
you can,
based on the specific situation.
right. And so I was thinking about other games that have more. I'm trying to think of games that that I would be. I'm trying to give science fiction role playing some credit. I want to see where its strengths are. Where are the features that I'm looking at? The ongoing dramas and the provocative science fiction. You know that I'm a big fan of Zero.
Yes.
That there's a school of science fiction role playing. Zero is one of them, and so is Lacuna. Right here, one can even count Numenon. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. That's where you play cockroaches.
No, not with the last one.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with Ocean
No.
by Jake Richmond. What's interesting about all these is that they're all amnesic or impaired or limited knowledge for the player characters and typically the players. And so it reminds me, I mean, there is a whole field of science fiction, less so in TV, but more recently in TV, where you don't know. And you know what? Actually, the science fiction show that really kicks that off for me, it goes all the way back to the 60s with The Prisoner. Right? The idea is the viewer does not know what's going on. The protagonist does not know what's going on. And sometimes you get the idea that nobody else does either. And then other times you get the idea, I mean, but they keep bringing things up that are sufficiently psychologically disturbing and sufficiently socially disturbing all the time, you know. And there's different schools. Like if you go to the kind of thing where the characters wake up in a trap, like they're laboratory rats, whether it's planned or unplanned. Ocean is like that. Other times you get the idea that something sort of more mystical is happening, that they're in some sort of psychological transition, perhaps into becoming truly human or something like that, or perhaps transforming from being human into a new level of existence or something like that. And that would be, that Numenon is like that. Zero is a little bit like that in that the characters are basically so biologically and technologically distorted into being hive insects that now that they're disconnected from the hive, they're in a state of complete disorientation. And so you literally are building a character sheet out of nothing. Your character sheet was your role in the hive. The mechanisms of the game actually can turn you into somebody very different, into a person, basically. And the same thing goes with Lacuna. Typically, Jared will never really come clean, except maybe privately. But the very strong implication in Lacuna is that you are repurposed psychopathic criminals who are now doing some form of surrealistic psychological espionage. And so but the idea is that you are grappling with all sorts of very strange things, uh, and coping with the changing reality around you and your understanding of that reality. So we do see that kind of science fiction in role playing. And just like in the visual media, keeping the player off balance as much as the character, just like in the TV, keeping the viewer off balance as much as the characters. Do you know of any other games where the characters and the players are kind of off balance and in some kind of a
It
mysterious or dream state or trap
is
or
not
something?
is not a science fiction game, but it becomes one always often. Is the one where you have a psychiatric patient that is recovering his memory. I don't remember the name. The one where you have to choose between two options given you from the other players.
That's not a penny for my thoughts or something like
Yes,
that?
yes, that one.
Right, okay.
The penny for-
Right. That's a good example, actually. I hadn't remembered that until now. And I also was thinking of a very obscure game from the 90s called Oblivion: Ship of Fools, which I read. No, I played. You're supposed to, it's one of these games, like a lot of these. This is in the sort of older tradition in some ways of the players really shouldn't know anything. The players really need to go into this blind because that disorientation on your part is part of the
resolve
experience. It's
the
desired.
problem of the
Right.
info dump.
Sure. And so and in this case, I'm not going to say it's just a power trip. I'm saying it's for an experiential reason. And Oblivion: Ship of Fools, therefore I was a player. I didn't run the game. I didn't know what was up. But it had a really, one of the few games that uses tarot cards for really cool resolution, really useful resolution for tarot cards. It wasn't just a gimmick. And they and it's a generation ship. Everybody's forgotten, that it's a ship. And not only that, but they also have a set of delusions, induced delusions about where they are. So it feels to the characters as though they're progressing through dimensions, right? But what they're really doing is getting closer and closer and closer toward actually seeing, where they are. And it's and understanding what the dangers that they're in. So it actually was pretty good, for a one play book. You play with this group one time. You can only play once, and because it doesn't have like multiple interpretations that you can go different. It's not replayable. And but for a game of that kind, it was actually surprisingly fun. Well managed, well run, well designed. So so those are some of the ones I can think of, and there's there may be a few more. It's kind of the only, it's one of the few places where science fiction television, drawing from the larger science fiction, and science fiction role playing, drawing from the larger science fiction, actually come to the same place. You know, because there's a lot of examples that we were examining that they don't come to the same place. There's a whole lot more military experience. You get to be a cyber soldier kind of role playing than there is science fiction television. When you see that kind of thing in television, I don't know if you saw the show Space Above and Beyond.
No.
It was in the mid 2000s, and it was a short-lived space soldiers TV show that surprisingly ended up not just being unironic Starship Troopers. It ended up, it wasn't, you get the idea that the Pentagon and the network thought that it would just be a go get them, fight the enemy show. And the writers and the producers were kind of like, no, that's not how you do science fiction. So there's kind of a weird tension between those two things in the show. But yeah, there aren't, a lot of the military science fiction role playing tends not to have that in it, or maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe, maybe those games are full of social satire and, are more like 316 than we thought. I mean, 316 is obviously the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's Catch 22 in space. Am I wrong? Maybe Mega Traveler is exactly like that, for all I know. I don't think so.
Never read or played it.
Yeah. So okay, it's kind of interesting. Do you have any ideas on why you've avoided? I mean, I know you like reading science fiction.
I was a very big fan of science fiction in the 70s. I think it was a phase where when I was 13, 14, 15, I discovered a new world. I discovered that I could not, I didn't have to ask my parents to buy me a book.
Right. No,
I could ask them directly for money and then myself choose the book. It was a very big discovery.
Right.
And I did spend a lot of money. At the time, I began to earn money for myself, little by little. And I think I did read hundreds of science fiction books in a few years.
Yeah, you and I are very, very similar in all these details. So yes, I know the feeling. In the same era. So of course we're reading a lot of the same stuff, and a lot of it's very, very intense.
Then I had much less time. I began to go to university. I returned to reading comic book after almost a pause of some years, and I read less then, and it was not the same anymore. At the time, I thought I am going up.
Right.
Now, looking back, I think it was science fiction was changing too. There was no more little book that you could read in an afternoon.
Right.
It was a saga in 5, 6 volume, and I could not stand cyberpunk.
Right.
I hated it. Really hated it.
See, Neuromancer came out in 1982, and Blade Runner, the movie, is I think 1981 or 1982.
True, I think.
Yeah, but I think I encountered them a couple of years later. At the time, cyberpunk seemed so exciting because it drew upon modern politics. It's cinematic, especially Gibson's. He's really writing movie scripts and writing like movie type dialogue. And at the time, that seemed very exciting. The other stuff like Bruce Sterling and K.W. Jite were very intellectual. So you felt smart, you felt like you were reading, smart stuff. And at the time, so it was surprisingly enough now, in the mid 80s, when I was in my very early 20s, cyberpunk was the elevated science fiction. That was the serious science fiction reader. You were ahead of the curve. You were relevant. You were today. This was the science fiction of today. It changed real fast after that.
I have a friend that I did meet after the 80s, so after cyberpunk, and he's a very big fan of cyberpunk. And he told me things like the first time adult science fiction, not just. I had to land. I never land book because I am very possessive of my book. I had to land it some Alfred Bester book.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. The Stars
blew his mind. He never imagined something like that before.
The Stars My Destination was published in 1956. 56, and nearly everything in cyberpunk is a footnote to that book, and I still can't believe it. I mean, I remember I actually read that. I read that as a young teen, and you may be amused to know that, as well as me reading it on my own, it was also an assigned book in my high school English class. And they took it very seriously. The instructors took that extremely seriously and said, no, this is a book. This is a book that high school students need to read. You know.
In my school, we did read Christian books because we had a teacher who was a member of a very religious political group. So you can see why I have some issue with the Catholic Church. Even in high school, it was not safe anywhere.
Right. So the effect, I like to say, and I don't think I made this up. I think someone else said it, and I just repeat it, that cyberpunk was over before it began. And my argument is that people imitated particular works so thoroughly without trying to work with, without trying to keep doing this themselves. They just said, well, if I do Neuromancer Light, I have a novel, and I think I found a few exceptions. I've always stayed on the alert, is there something, is this going to go somewhere? For me, I love the original Cyberpunk role-playing game. The original Cyberpunk is lean, mean, dirty, anti-establishment, completely, punkish. And the rewrite into Cyberpunk 2020, I had no interest in at all. None. Just none. I can't see the point. I didn't like it. People have tried to tell me, no, it's the same. It's the same game, Ron. And I maybe they're right and I'm wrong, but I can't see it. And I would say, well, I just give up on the whole thing. But then one of my favorite science fiction TV shows is Ghost in the Shell, which is fantastic. It's really, really good. And so, but this is my question. Where's the role playing with the cyberpunk force of the best of the available material? Where is there are some games that have done the whole human machine, back and forth crisis. But it's real easy to get seduced by the cyberware because they're superpowers. So do you know
people with mirror shade, everybody wearing the same dress?
That was the kind of interesting thing, is that in Neuromancer, there was a character with built-in sunglasses. One person doing it. Just one character, not all the characters. And not only that, but she was considered freakish. It was considered, horrifying that she had done this, and hold on just a moment. There we go. I'm trying to think, is there a form of that kind of role playing in which it is genuinely hard to be half machine, just to go to that issue. And particularly in terms of your situation being politically completely messed up. The original novel, Cyborg, is pretty good. And as I've written about in the comics blog, the show, The $6 Million Man, more often than not was surprisingly dark about the character's role as being considered a machine by his own employers, his own, and in many ways, is he a slave? Do they own him because they rebuilt him? You know,
As I say, I'm not very familiar with the science fiction after the 80, my early 80s, but I did think that before that, the cyborg was almost horror concept.
right. Hold
I
on a second.
remember, I
Yeah.
don't remember
Eric,
the
you have to
title.
wait.
I don't remember the title, but it was a short novel by Ballard with a cyborg. A guy was taken some. It was horror. Everything described it horrific.
And you're right. I mean, in other words, and in Cyborg, it's kind of interesting because he finally has to think of them as assets, his parts as assets rather than as prosthetics. Um, but but you're right. I mean, the idea that, I mean, in a way, it's kind of ableist because some of your body is missing, you're less human, right?
Mhm.
I mean, there's that kind of thing. And then there's also but you're right that the superpowers were definitely there with a price.
The character, the one was half machine, half man, and two different brains. Half
Right.
of the brains. I don't remember the
Well, wait,
name.
are you?
Deathlock.
Well,
Deathlock.
yeah. Well, now you're talking about comics, and that's Deathlock for
Yes,
sure.
comics.
No, Deathlock is the quintessential cyborg, and he's amazing. The he is one of the great forgotten characters of comics, and I don't care if they've rebooted him. That doesn't count. But the actual Deathlock is really, it's very uncompromising, and and yeah, there's been a lot of rewrites and reinterpretations and things that I don't think are true that they say about the comic. Um, so still though, yes, I mean he's a walking corpse, and he knows it. You know.
So to play something like Deathlock, probably you need something like Sorcerer. So the machine part has a price, a very
Right.
big price, and is inhuman.
Yeah. Yeah, and to some extent, I mean, the question is whether you're going to be more inhuman than your own demon,
Yes.
right? And so, and so that's a big part of it. And I think I think it'd be interesting. I mean, there may be a role-playing game out there that actually is built that way around the robotics themselves. But one thing that those stories have is what I mentioned before is the fact that the institutions and circumstances around the character are bad. In
Mhm.
Deathlock, Manhattan has turned into a wasteland and there are cannibal gangs roaming around. I mean, and it's under military lockdown, and there's a crazy, general, who's running the place, and so it's really, uh, you can't just be in the ordinary world, in the world of many of these other characters in Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. The head agent and her boss of their little security division, they actually side with who you thought was the bad guy most of the series. They flip. They literally flip and work against their own government on the side of this guy. And the circumstances of heroism are not easy. You're not the only monster here. There are bigger, more powerful, more structural monsters than you. And I think that's a big part of it. I mean, one of the best movies, of course, is RoboCop, the original RoboCop by itself.
Yes.
And again, I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, he's dead, and he's the most
Mm.
human character in the show, right? Or very close to it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Deathlock in a lot of these characters.